got another great session this morning, and I want to thank Jennifer Lever coming out from Bizarre Voice. She runs global ABM initiatives at Bizarre Voice, and every week the way we typically kick things off is we have a poll of the week, and let me pull that poll up, and we'll get a more formal introduction of Jennifer in a moment. But this week's poll, we asked questions in and around the alignment of sales and marketing. And the reason I brought this question to the forefront is another vendor I was in conversations with and one of my clients, and they were asking me the question of, hey, where are you seeing the breakdown between strategy and execution? Now, admittedly, and somewhat self-serving, we straddle this execution and strategy side. And so I was probably more in the camp of the execution side of things on what I was seeing. But I'm curious, Megan, what you see or what you think in terms of where the alignment is missing on ABM initiatives. Is it the strategy side? Is it the execution side? It's kind of a coin toss either way.
Yeah, I can see why the poll ended up this way. Because it could even be both, right? Within a given company, because one sort of leads to the other, where you've got a mismatch on strategic alignment, and then that leads to some execution issues. And definitely, I see my friend Terry weighing in that it really does start with the strategic alignment. And I agree with him in that if you don't have shared goals, right, and if marketing has a goal that is all about marketing, i.e. the old MQL, then by all means, you're not going to go in the right direction. But then I also, see what Linda's saying, right? More and more companies are moving to a shared pipeline goal, with some portion of that being marketing's responsibility, or, ideally kind of where Terry's going, right? Is it's the same goal. You're both contributing to it. Now let's agree on how each of us is going to help, as opposed to how each of us is going to fight to take credit, in particular marketing fighting to take credit. So, I definitely see where this one landed. And I think this is more going to be dependent on the organization. But Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm super excited for you to share your experience. And in particular, I think you have an interesting point of view in terms of where ABM should sit in an organization to avoid alignment challenges. What are your thoughts there in terms of the right kind of org design?
Yeah. First off, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this session for quite some time, so really happy to be here. And that's a great question. I really think that it depends on where the company lands on the maturity scale of ABM, and also the company size and what your goals are, right? So for instance, I sit on the demand gen team, and I run the ABM function across all of our global accounts and teams. But I have also, heard from colleagues where they sit on the sales side to support more of that enterprise one-to-one ABM function. We do all of the flavors of ABM. For us, it just makes more sense for ABM to be a part of the demand gen function. And I really feel like it should fit or sit on the marketing team, but we need to make sure that sales understands that partnership and that alignment that needs to happen there, right? So even if we are sitting on a different business unit, we are all part of the same revenue engine that is working towards that same shared goal, Megan, that you had mentioned earlier.
I was thinking back to earlier this year. The one conference that I've attended in person is where we actually met up, Jennifer, when we were, I think I was presenting something about the unified funnel. It was a B2B SMX over the summer. And what struck me were the questions that you were asking of me, not only in the session, but also after the session, made me realize that, whoa, Bizarre Voice is pretty far down the path in terms of the maturity of questions that you were asking relative to a lot of other people that I know. I'm curious, what have you learned, or what has been your experience in building that program or rebuilding that program as kind of the queen of ABM within Bizarre Voice?
Yeah, that's another great question. So like you mentioned, John, when I first joined the team last January, they had done ABM in the past, but it was very ad hoc. It was more so around launching a particular product. They would work with sales to identify their top 25 accounts that they wanted to go after. But the process was very manual. I think the swim lanes and the responsibilities were not mapped out the way that they probably should have been. It was like, marketing's going to go do this thing, and then sales is going to eventually pick it up, but there wasn't that clear alignment of how the two are going to partner, right? And I think that that's one of the biggest misconceptions about ABM, and really why I'm starting to call it ABX, because it's about the experiences that you're putting accounts through. It's not just a separate marketing function. It's that partnership that you have with sales, even CS, when you're looking at, a growth and retention play, and the involvement in with your product marketing team too. So, what is your positioning? What does your messaging look like? What does that sales enablement piece look like? So it's so much more than just a marketing function now. And so when I came on board, it was really about re-educating and helping the team understand that this is a unified effort. This is a revenue organization function that will help us all work towards the same goal, and that goal is revenue.
John, I was very impressed with Jennifer's questions too at B2BMX a couple of months ago. The questions she asked, how she asked them, really put forward a real mature view into ABM. So congratulations, Jen, for that. I think too, right, the benefit that I think what adds to that too is, you're now run by, Keith Nealon as your CEO. Keith was my CRO in the early days at Eloqua, right? Mm-hmm. So he brings that really solid, marketing's great, but marketing is there to benefit sales, right? So he brings that, that not only did we come, at Eloqua in the early days, just kind of reimagine what marketing really meant to the demand generation pipeline, that they were as important as sales was as important to sales. But now with ABM marketing or ABX marketing, whatever we want to call it, that's that next evolution. And for you to have, that CEO, and for you guys to be as mature as you are, kind of is not a big surprise to me. And I'm really impressed. And that's why I wanted to sit in on today and just hear more about how you guys are approaching.
Yeah, Keith has been great in supporting that and really making sure that our revenue organization understands the value behind that account-centric approach, right? And I mean, where we are now, we're running all of the different flavors of ABM. So we have one-to-many, one-to-few, one-to-one. When we started though, I really wanted to make sure that we were using a crawl, walk, run approach, because there was that piece where we did have to re-educate the sales team and get them on board to really understand that the value of looking at an account from a more holistic angle, and not just a single lead that's coming through, or this is an account that I really want to close in my patch. Okay, well, why? Where is the data that's showing this or supporting that's where you should be focusing your efforts on? We were able to pull in and start to serve up to them intent data, engagement data, back to the crawl, walk, run approach. We started launching ABM with a very small pilot team on the sales side. So our sales team is 300 plus people across the globe. So rolling out ABM to everybody probably would have failed if we had done it, if we had done it that way to start. So we started with a very, very small group. We had a good mix of SDRs, AEs, ADs, client success folks, and then a good mix of NA, North America, and EMEA. So we really wanted to pressure test the strategy. We wanted to pressure test the insights and that account intelligence that we were serving up to sales, to help define what this is going to look like for the rest of the organization, help build that internal advocacy, right? So when we had that small group of sales, tapping into intent and engagement data and working alongside marketing and being able to show how that was moving these business outcomes forward, the other sellers were like, oh, I want intent data. I want engagement data. I want to start looking at things from a more account specific lens, right? So it built that internal advocacy and that sense of FOMO for people to get on board with what we were trying to build.
Jennifer, I want to go back to a comment you just made or earlier in that around, asking a rep, why do you want that account? How has that been going in terms of now and again, you're going to run into situations where a rep asks for an account that if you look at the data, it doesn't look like a great fit. How do you have those conversations to nicely say no? Or do you have to say yes, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So a lot of when we look at our one-to-one campaigns, I think that's where that conversation comes up more so than not. So we collaborate very closely with not only our VP of sales, but also our sales managers to really understand, okay, based on historical data, based on where our current relationship is with, say, our top 10 enterprise level accounts, where do we have the most opportunity? Where do we have the most white space? And even sometimes, where do we have friction? Where have we been able to kind of get our foot in the door? But if we could just get in front of the right people and have the right conversations, how could we drive that relationship forward even more than what we've already accomplished? So there's a lot of conversation and collaboration going back and forth to identify what those accounts are. And then my job from the marketing side is to then support that decision with insights and data. So historically, we look back at our win rates. We look back at other accounts that look like that enterprise account to say, okay, well, we've been able to, these are the milestones that we've been able to accomplish here. How can we apply that same methodology to this account? And so it's very much a collaborative effort there, because my sales team is now so bought in on it and they understand the resource lift and they understand the value behind doing those strategic one-to-one campaigns. It's much more of a collaborative effort than it is, hey, marketing, I want to land this account, go do your marketing thing. So yeah.
How does that interaction? I'm curious because we were talking as we were coming online here about the reporting structure and you feed into demand gen. I would think that you might be a little competitive, at least on the demand gen side of their one-to-many approach. And then you've got ABM. How do you maintain your voice in that conversation? Because that's got to be super challenging to be heard, I would guess.
Yeah, I mean, we are kind of a brand, I don't want to say brand new demand gen team, but everybody on my team has joined over the last 2 years. And we were all hired with the goal of standing up each individual channel, but also understanding how we can cross collaborate. So even though my focus is a little bit more targeted, there's still a ton of value that comes in from what we're running on the webinar side, what we're running on the email marketing side. All of those functions continue to help sales get that broader air cover, right? So there's not lost value there. And then, I just focus on more of those strategic initiatives, but there's value across the board. So it's not necessarily that one person's voice is louder than the other. It's really about the projects that we're working on, the initiatives that we're trying to drive, and where it makes more sense for our sales team to partner with specific people on the demand gen team to drive that outcome forward, right? So from a reporting standpoint, anytime we're working together on like a one-to-one campaign, I have biweekly syncs with those account teams, right? Those account teams are where I get the insight to understand what's actually working. Where do we need to pivot our strategy? How do we need to align our messaging and our solution to what the account actually cares about? Because each one is going to be different, right? And that account team is on the front line. So as a marketer, I can use data and I can use assumptions to build out what I think we should go to market with. But I also need to make sure that I'm leaning on that account team, the CSD, the account manager, to really understand, okay, does that make sense? We also want to make sure that we're looking at things like, if we want to launch a campaign, is there an upcoming renewal that we've already started having conversations with that maybe is a little bit more sensitive, that we need to maybe scale back our approach or think about it from a different angle because those renewal conversations have already started. So it changes from account to account, but I think visibility is key. Having those weekly syncs with your account team is key. And then also making sure that you're continuing to report out to the wider business with your sales leadership and marketing leadership so they understand and see that value from a reporting standpoint.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a really tactical question here, and it's sort of related to alignment. I don't know enough about Jennifer's practice to know whether she's got an ABM practice and a demand gen practice as separate organizations. But let's just assume that it's one organization with different motions. I wanted to talk about variable comp. To me, the potential for variable comp in a demand gen practice seems like a pretty clear capability because you can associate it probably with MQLs. But as the objectives kind of morph into more engagement-based objectives and longer-term revenue yield on the ABM side, what do you do about variable comp if you have it for a demand gen team that you want to become more account-oriented?
That's a great question. So we, in terms of variable comp, our marketing team or demand gen team is responsible for a certain percentage of marketing sourced pipeline and marketing sourced bookings, right? And when you think of the traditional demand gen function, that makes a lot of sense because you can tie back MQLs coming from a webinar, or if somebody's scored up after reading X number of ebooks and whatnot, you can tie that back. The issue though is going to turn into attribution, right? So when if somebody attended the webinar, they MQL'd, but then the opportunity is opened on somebody else in that company, then we lose that attribution, right? But that doesn't mean that marketing didn't influence that motion forward. And I think as you get into the more of the ABM space, and because there is that close alignment with sales, those lines start to get blurred, right? And I think that's a good thing because at the end of the day, you guys should be sharing the same goal, and that same goal at the end of the day is revenue. So when it comes to ABM, it's also a full funnel motion. My campaigns don't stop after an opportunity's been opened with an account. We follow them all the way through closed won, and then there's that customer grow and retain focus that we look at after they have signed on the dotted line. So because marketing is starting to bleed into those later sales funnel stages, I think that we really need to kind of take a step back and look at it from a more modern lens. And that is that we should be working towards the same goal, and we should be looking at marketing source and marketing influence and understanding that full funnel impact across the board.
Okay, let me do a follow-up. So are we saying that as the objectives of marketing morph towards better engaging the accounts on the ABM list, that if more revenue is achieved in that account, that marketing should get credit regardless of the shortcomings of the attribution model? And if so, can we pay the team based on the performance of the accounts on the ABM list, regardless of MQL counts?
So we, because right now we are responsible for a certain percentage of marketing source. At the end of the year, we look at whether or not we made our goal as a revenue organization. So yes, we are still responsible from a monthly and quarterly basis, but at the end of the day, when our team looks back at it, it's did we make our goals in pipelines and bookings, right? So I think, to incentivize the team, it's for me, the incentivization is really more around like creating that unified front and seeing the results that happen. And I wouldn't be motivated necessarily by that, getting more money because I did X, Y, Z, because I think that still kind of creates that silo between marketing and sales. If everybody is getting the same recognition and we're all getting the same reward at the end of the day, I think that helps create more of that unified collaborative front. But when we start to look at, will marketing get an incentive for doing X, Y, Z? It's still creating that silo between the two teams.
Okay, so it sounds to me like you've got variable comp on demand gen measures and you have variable comp on total revenue.
More so on total revenue than on specific demand gen campaigns or what we're contributing to. We have a contribution goal, but it's much higher than that when we look at it from an annual perspective.
Maybe because if I look at the ABM list and I say, these are all high potential accounts, that's why they're on the list. I'm very interested in getting more revenue from each one. So I'm interested in total revenue, and I'm interested in like average revenue growth per account or specific accounts. I'm just intrigued about how do we, when marketers kind of double down, or when marketers say, the data shows we can see an opportunity there, and I really need sales to pursue it, but they don't because it doesn't align to their understanding of how they'll reach quota. How do we resolve that? How do we resolve those incentives where the goal is improve for marketing? It's improvement across all the accounts on the list. For sales, it's often just make my quota.
I think that's a really good point. And I think that is a good kind of circle back to what Megan had brought up earlier around, it's identifying and aligning on those goals and what accounts you're going to go after first and foremost, and making sure that you have buy-in, not only from an executive level, but a sales management level and the account team level is going to be key. Because you can run ABM programs all day long, but if there's not that alignment there, the success isn't going to be there. And I think it's also really important for sales to understand that when you implement ABM or ABX, that it is a partnership. Marketing is no longer a resource at that point. It's a true partnership. And in order for us to see those results happen, both people need to understand swim lanes and understand and be accountable for what, when sales needs to pick it up, when marketing needs to go back and revisit the strategy or pivot our approach. And I think that's where that open feedback loop is also extremely important, making sure that you have those regular syncs. You're looking at the numbers, you're looking at the impact, and looking at those early engagement metrics, John, that you had mentioned, around, how are we starting to move the needle forward in these accounts? Because depending on how long your deal cycles are, it could take 9-12 months before you actually see revenue getting closed, right? So how do we start to look at the impact that we're making as a team within these target accounts? And that's around, are we starting to get in touch with net new contacts? Are we starting to see an uplift in engagement on our website? Are we starting to see more conversations happening on the sales side? More, and then using all of those insights and those engagement metrics, feeding them up to sales so they can be more informed and have more relevant conversations with those accounts. So I think celebrating those early wins and identifying those early KPIs is also very key in making sure that alignment continues throughout the entire program.
I think I heard two really important alignment things. A while back, you mentioned sort of these many points of light alignments with individual sellers to get them to adopt the program and be excited, or the elements within the program that support sales and get really excited. That seems an obvious one. But the other point that I raised that was kind of in conflict with that was that sometimes the actual strategic goal of ABM, of improving the results across all these accounts, is somewhat in conflict with the individual rep's goal. So the other point of alignment that you made, I thought, with sales management is super important. Mm-hmm. Sales management has to want the ABX thing to succeed, to increase sales management's performance across all the accounts that they want to focus on. And that's where marketing is actually aligned with sales management somewhat in a conflicting way with the individual seller, because the individual seller negotiates their quota with sales management, right? There's a little bit of oppositional behavior there, but sales management has a much bigger strategic goal. And I think the alignment point there with sales management is a really interesting and important one.
Well, I mean, it's just like when we look at a one-to-one campaign, we want to make sure that we're activating when our account teams are looking at an account that they want to grow in, that they're activating their day-to-day contacts, right? that they're having conversations with every day. But we also want to make sure that we have that top-down approach, because that's where if we're working on the top and in the middle, the two are eventually going to intersect. So having a same thing internally, if you have sales leadership on board with it, they understand the value and they're able to speak that story and that value to their account teams, that's going to resonate a lot more than marketing coming to the table and saying, we should do ABM. It's going to be awesome. And these are the results that you're going to see. But when they hear that same support and that same message coming from sales leadership, and they know that they have the support from their sales manager to say, we're going to focus on this account, we're going to drive as much as we possibly can in it, that is a very powerful message.
Jennifer, I'm curious to know, one of the things that we hear is really hard is getting reps to take action on all the data that gets shared with them. I mean, you both, John, Jennifer, you both got me thinking about the fact that if I've got a rep who has this list of target accounts and marketing is gathering all of this data about whether they are or not engaging directly with you or are not displaying signs of engaging broadly with the things you would expect if they're interested in your area and ready to jump into buying or actively engage with buying, that could actually lead to almost like a check and balance situation with sales leadership too, right? I'm curious to know, how you're serving that data up to your reps and what they're doing with it. And also, is sales management making use of that as almost like a check or a balance on what the reps are telling them?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So, first and foremost, I try to make whatever we roll out I don't want to say as simple as possible, but as streamlined and straightforward as possible, right? And if there's a way for me to bake in what we're doing from an ABM perspective into a current sales motion or process, that's going to be your easiest lift to really get that full team adoption, right? I think second to that, leveraging that single source of truth. So for my sales team, they live and breathe in Salesforce. So the more insight and more intel that I can feed into that platform that they live and breathe in every single day, the more adoption we're going to get across the board. And the other thing too is that, again, that partnership with sales leadership. So being able to look at, okay, this is our target account list. Marketing is doing XYZ to create awareness, to warm these accounts up, to get them more sales ready for sales. And then looking at how those accounts are to move through the funnel and use it more so as like an accountability dashboard that we can build in Salesforce. So as a sales leader, you can go in and say, hey, marketing is doing all of these things. We need to make sure that our team is also picking up the baton on their end when those accounts are more sales ready to have those conversations. So I think that single source of truth is important. That accountability piece is important. And then seeing, where and how you can streamline the process and bake it into existing sales motions is key.
There is an interesting angle here in terms of if marketing is being successful in seeing demand and engagement and demand in the accounts, but the sales rep is not able to pursue that for whatever reason, to actually advocate for a change in the resourcing model on the sales side. So over time, you'll get this data that says, well, we're showing all this potential at the account of real active demand, but we can't get the reps to pursue it because they've got too many accounts in their patch or any number of things. How can we help? How can the organization help the reps do that? That's a sales management discussion. Or are we resourcing the available opportunities well enough? And I think the guys at Forrester are starting to really look at this now. How does resourcing evolve on the sales side? And I think marketing has a role to play here in surfacing questions about, are we resourced correctly to take advantage of what ABM is surfacing? That's going to be a really interesting development to track.
Well, and I think those insights that we're able to serve up as a marketing team to sales helps them prioritize. So when they start to see the value of, okay, if I focus on these 10 accounts that are showing intent and engagement, they're in active marketing campaigns versus 10 that are not, and they start to see that lift on their own side, I think that's where it's going to start to shift their perspective and how and when they prioritize. So I think that when again, it's all how you package it. And again, having that support from the top down is extremely important.
Hey,
Just keep it on-
Jennifer.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I was just going to say, Jennifer, I'm finding this super insightful. And it's interesting because we're working with Meg and we're looking to implement account-based here at Menlo Security. And a couple of things that I heard from you that really resonated was, one, you piloted ABM with a small group so that you can get some quick wins and then amplify it internally. The second is you mentioned ABM is a full funnel motion, which I love because, I'm having discussions right now where I'm hearing from sales, marketing, we need to build the playbook because it's the beginning phase. And I literally was just in a conversation yesterday saying, no, it's actually full funnel. We go across the board. We can measure win rates and acceleration rates. And, so to me, it's like there's an education piece that needs to play in. And then the other piece that I loved is sharing of data and using that as your opportunity to prioritize and look at where you should put a lot of your focus. And so my question for you is, for us as a startup, and we're trying to educate, we're trying to build a whole new motion versus just let's look at all things leads. What were the steps that you took to set those expectations with that smaller group, the process that you took to build that up, and then even lessons learned? Because I'm literally at that point right now, and I want to make sure that I'm taking the steps to do it correctly, because there's a lot of mindsets that we need to change. But I also think at this point, we have a lot of collaboration opportunity. But again, we just need to make sure we're doing it right.
Yeah. So, anytime I launch a new piece of marketing tech that's going to support my ABM campaigns, a lot of what I bring on board has both a marketing and sales function to it. And I always start off with a small pilot team because that does help us pressure test with a much smaller group, help develop what those playbooks look like. And then, as we start to roll it out to the wider team, and it helps build that internal advocacy too. So one of the program, when we first launched our first one-to-one campaign, we started with one account. And we picked an account team that we knew would be a really good partner with marketing, and that, already was bought into the concept of account-based marketing and what it could drive. And, the feedback that I got from the account manager that's on that account was, when we kicked off ABM and now that we're, 6 months into it, she said, I feel like I have 100 SDRs running in the background to help me move my conversations forward in this house of brands accounts that we're focusing on. Right. So when you start to have sales speak that language, and you start to have them kind of, spread the good word to their other sales counterparts or peers, I think that is where you start to gain that traction, right? So, because at the end of the day, like their biggest thing is, how am I going to make more money, right? How am I going to close more accounts and make more money? And so when they can start to see the value that this brings to the table and how that starts to affect that dollar amount, then, you've got a lot more buy-in from a sales standpoint. So I think starting small, scaling up is always key. Making sure that it's simple and streamlined whenever you are rolling it out to the rest of the organization. And it's okay to fail. There were campaigns that we launched that didn't do so well, and then there were others that did really, really well. And sometimes that varied from account to account, right? So I think that as a marketer, that curiosity piece, we need to keep tapping into that and being willing to do the things that may or may not be effective the first time around, right? But that doesn't mean that we've completely failed the strategy. It just means we just need to pivot a little bit more, rethink, look at things from a different perspective. So don't stop being curious and testing, and don't be afraid to fail. Because there's been tons of campaigns that I've launched that didn't give me the same yield that I would have hoped to have, but that's a learning opportunity, right? You turn those L's into lessons, and you figure out how to keep moving forward.
I love that. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I think we're just about at time here. What a great conversation, Jennifer. Thank you for making it out a little bit early for this discussion. And Megan, we're talking about product marketing, I think next week, right? Next Friday?
We are. We have Rowan Nerona, who is the founder of the product marketing community, which he's built as a labor of love up to 20,000 people, which is amazing. And I get to help him out as a volunteer, kind of on the content strategy side for that group. And yeah, he's just doing some tremendous work and has a really great perspective. And what we're hearing more and more is that product marketing is a critical component of an account-based strategy, but also probably the one that's least connected these days. So more and more, we're definitely seeing that that's a critical piece. So we invited Rowan to come and talk with us about the evolution of product marketing's roles and responsibilities, how how they can engage with demand/account-based teams, and just all things product marketing. So it should be a fun one next week. Hope to see everybody there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Product marketing is such a challenging role to fulfill, and yeah, a lot of different definitions of it. So I'm looking forward to next week's discussion. Same time, same channel. Hope you guys can join us. And Jennifer, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks again for having me. This is great.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.